You're listening to episode 83 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. George Mumford speaks with us about the mindful athlete, secrets to peak performance. I remember being not so good at sports growing up, to put it kindly. Psyching myself out was what we called at least part of that. Overthinking things which took me out of the moment, strangling any flow of body and mind. Even professional athletes may run into this difficulty on occasion, and mindfulness can play a key role in helping be present. George Mumford is an author, educator, and mindfulness teacher. He has consulted on each of the NBA championship teams Phil Jackson coached. He's also a consultant with high school, college, and Olympic athletes, inmates, and corporate executives. And he is a sought-after public speaker at both business and athletic conferences, nationally and internationally. Special thanks to our friend Rose Pavlov of Ivy Child International for coordinating today's interview. Our guest today is George Mumford. George, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. I've been hoping to get to speak to you for quite some time. So let's jump right in and have you tell us about yourself and your background.
I don't know how much I want to get into. I talk about it in my book, The Mindful Athlete, Secrets to Pure Performance, and other interviews. But basically, I got into learning about mindfulness and whatnot after I think it was 1984, I went into recovery from substance abuse, and I was in this HMO, which back then there weren't many HMOs, but I was in an HMO, and I was working with a therapist who helped me, get my recovery program together. And one of the things that was pretty obvious was that I had a lot of chronic pain and stress. And at the time, there was a revolutionary program or a new program being offered by Joan Borisenko called stress management, or managing stress, I think it was. And it was basically a program that was a combination of education and practices and whatnot. So we had a syllabus of about, I don't want to say maybe 30 books. And we would be pre and post tested. They would test our blood and our saliva. And that's where I learned how to manage my chronic pain, learning about mindfulness and yoga, and also about the mind-body connection. So there was a big component of just really learning and about various things, about meditation, about the mind-body connection, some psychological books, but really a bunch of self-help books that were a significant part of the program. And I have been in recovery for 32 and a half years now, and I've been averaging over a book a week. So needless to say, I read every book on that syllabus, and then I used the back of the book where it had recommended readings, and I would read those books. And then I just kept reading and reading and reading and learning. But the main thing was the mindfulness really helped me, the whole practice of insight meditation, but specifically, the practice of mindfulness, which is the heart of of insight meditation, as well as this idea of understanding, what I'm doing and why and those sorts of things. So you start to understand that having the right view is important, having the right intention is important, and doing the right action, is important. That I'm not causing harm for myself or others consciously. And the whole idea of the mental training is pretty obvious, I think, when we practice mindfulness and making the right effort and cultivating wisdom, that's really important. So mindfulness and wisdom is something that there's the other factors, but if you're not gaining wisdom, if you're not gaining understanding, then you're still going to be reacting to things instead of responding to things, because it's more mechanical and not deliberate. So that's how I got into it. And then I went back to graduate school and got an advanced degree in counseling psychology, and continued to work with all sorts of people. I used to live at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center for about 6 years. So during that time, we used to get requests. So I would go out and work with all sorts of people, that were in non-traditional settings. It could be like the Harvard Law School, it could be the Harvard Medical School, it could be like the telephone company AT&T, I think, or New England Telephone. It could be numerous things, juvenile centers, just about anybody who called. Elementary school, working with kids, did a lot of that stuff. So that kept doing that, and I was working as a financial analyst, and then I decided, at one point as it started to evolve, I quit my job, and for 2 years, that's when I first moved into the meditation center. I just studied and practiced, did long retreats, 3-month retreat, and 10-day, 14-day, just living at the center. I got to sit a lot and do a lot of practice, a lot of observation of the teachers teaching, and I just kind of got into it. And then I was, after a 3-month course, I came back to the meditation center, and there was a request for proposal from the Department of Corrections wanting somebody to go in and teach yoga and meditation to the inmates. And I applied. I had stiff competition, I must admit, from other people in the community, but because of my background and because of who I was, they felt I was a better fit. And sure enough, I started working in a couple of institutions. And even before that, I was working in this local jail, a county jail in Dedham. And I was doing what we call recovery-based training. So it's specific trainings to help people who are substance abusers start to learn how to work with their addiction. So it was once again a lot of information based, but also practice, but mainly just getting people to understand, what they were doing and how they could deal with it. And at the same time, I got connected with John Kabat-Zinn, and did the internship, watched him around and did a couple actually. And then at some point we decided, that DLC wanted a bigger program. So initially when I worked at the Center for Mindfulness, I helped develop the inner city program. And so we had a satellite, inner city, stress reduction program. So I helped set that up. And then the prison project came in. So I was doing both. And then I just focused on the prison project, because we were in like 5 institutions. You might notice we had over 5,000 inmates go through our program. And I did a program for staff and correction officers and administrators at the training facility, Medfield, Massachusetts, and just expanded. And then, of course, I continued to work with other people.
So what were the results of the prison programs? How did those go?
Well, they went really well. I don't know if because we never got funded for the research, so the research wasn't there. And plus we got kicked out of the program. And I think it was maybe it was 1996 when Governor Weld came on, and he decided he wanted to get tough on crime. So they kicked us out of the prison system. So the program abruptly ended our program, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and the recovery units they had, as well as they had an art program, they had a running program. All of these programs were showing they reduced recidivism quite a bit. And not like a lot of it was just people knowing it and some of the little studies, but not really big ones. So yeah, so that's what happened. We got kicked out of that, even though I used to get the funding from the Department of Justice. So the state wasn't even paying for the programs, but it was get tougher on crimes. And so they looked at it as we were coddling the inmates, and they got rid of all those programs. And I made a prediction back then that the way we were going is that we would be paying more money for corrections than we would be in the education. And that seemed to be true. And Governor Welch is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, and if you're reducing recidivism, you're reducing crime. And so it was effective.
Yeah, it was effective. And, we have stories of inmates being able to calm down when they, and deal with anger, to create space between stimulus and response. We have a lot of stories about that. We've also had stories about the correction officers who have gone through the program being able to remind the inmates to calm down and to diffuse situations that wouldn't have been diffused. But one of the interesting things that happened is I was giving a talk at the Cambridge Center at CIMC, Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. And one of the gentlemen in the audience was actually one of the inmates that I worked with in prison. He was, not only was he out and not recidivating, but he also was doing his art, and he was actually giving he had an art exposition. And so that was amazing. He came up to me afterwards, and it's like, okay, when that happens, you realize that this is really important. You don't always see the results right away, but this was a person who was actually at the meditation center, and it showed up. So I'm sure there's more stories like that. I mean, I used to get stories from administrators saying that, they used to drink a lot. Now they're not drinking because they were able to start to learn how to deal with their stress and understand their mind-body process, the mind-body connection.
So many of the listeners probably know you from your work in the sports world. Why don't you tell us about that, how that first came about?
Yes. Well, I was working at the Center for Mindfulness. Back in those days, it was called the Stress Reduction and Relaxation Program, which was still part of the Department of Preventive and Behavioral Medicine. And as you know, the Center for Mindfulness probably still has professional training at Omega Institute. A year, I imagine they still do that. Well, back in the day when they were doing that program, John and Saki were teaching that program. John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santorelli were teaching that program. And so they developed a relationship over the years with Phil Jackson and his wife at the time, June Jackson, because Phil used to do a program there called Beyond Basketball, where they would raise money for one of Phil's teammates, Eddie Mass, that passed away from a heart attack. So that was kind of a fund for the family, a memorial fund. And so they got to talking one year, and Phil was talking to them about the fact he wanted somebody to come in and teach the guys, being Chicago Bulls at the time, how to deal with the stresses of success, because they had just won their third NBA championship in a row, and this was 1993. And so Phil and I talked, and then he agreed that I would come in and work with the team during their preseason training camp, which is October. And by the time I got in there, Michael Jordan's father had been murdered, and Michael Jordan retired. So when I went there, it was full-blown crisis. And so I went in and I started working with the guys, and continued to work with the Bulls from 93 to 98 when Phil and company left the Bulls. And that was during the second three-peat, which means 3 championships in a row, 96, 97, 98. And then 1999, then I started working with Boston College men's basketball, and I started doing more college stuff and college sports stuff, working at multiple colleges. And then Phil took the year off. And then when he came back, 2000, 2001, 2002, he brought me in, and we won three more championships, another three-peat. And then in 2003, I believe was the last year I had worked with them full time, but I used to work with them when they used to come to Boston. Then it just exploded. And it was very interesting upon reflection when I was no longer working with the Lakers or Phil, and I was putting my bio together and everything, and I was going over it and said, okay, so in a 7-year period from 1996 to 2002, I was involved in 6 NBA championships. That's a really pretty good record. And the only year that I wasn't involved was the year he took off, but we picked up right away in 2000 with the Lakers. And so, I've worked with a lot of student athletes, most of my work has been with female teams, believe it or not, especially when I was at Boston College. But then, I worked with Olympians, been over to the Premiership over in England 3 different times, working with 3 different teams and doing a lot of executive coaching, working with organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, and just working with individual clients. Like I had one of my friends, who's a doctor, or OSHA doctor, one of the top in the field. He hired me to work with his wife on her tennis game I think it was one of her big birthdays. I don't know if it was the 40th I think it was her 40th birthday. And she turned around and wanted to hire me to work with his office because he got tired of spending a lot of time there. And so I would do things like that. So everything's been word of mouth. People would say, okay, George, come in, and I'd go in and I'd work with the organization and help it get righted and then move on to the next thing. So I'm fond of saying I work with people from Yale to jail, from locker rooms to boardrooms. If you have a mind and a body, I could probably work with you.
So, George, what made you decide to write the book? How did that come about?
Well, I had been trying to write a book for 20 years. Probably heard this before. And once I stopped trying to write a book, it wrote itself. But there's a backdrop to it. The backdrop is, well, I knew that I wanted to get the message out there that this is helpful, to do these practices, to have this way of life of introspection, of examining your life and actually realizing that you or we have the opportunity to change it, and that it's an inner game, it's an inner process, it's an inside out process, not an outside in. And that introspection and this idea of how are we going to develop the me to have a stronger we. And you see that in sports. But I had been, like I said, 20 years. And then I want to say it's 2014 when I got invited to work with John and Will Kabat-Zinn at this place at, I forget the name of the place on the West Coast. But anyway, Mount Madonna, I think is the name of the place. And it was being filmed by 60 Minutes. And so I get to talk to Anderson Cooper and some of the other participants. There were about 23 of us or something like that. And they had a panel where they had like 7 of us. And they were asking questions, like one of the questions they asked that I thought was pretty interesting. They said, well, what stops employers from using mindfulness to exploit the employees? And as we were kind of contemplating, I had an answer, but I didn't feel comfortable answering it because first of all, something that complex you can't answer in a soundbite and do it. And the other part of it was I just noticed that there are a lot of people doing mindfulness, but they might not be doing it in the most powerful way. And so I wanted to write a book about another option, how it's great to do the mental training component, and most people focus on that, and you get some relief, you get symptom relief, you get some stress reduction, you might even get some understanding of some things. So I just felt the need that I needed to share. I wanted to talk, not that, because it's interesting. I heard Joseph Goldstein said that there's many ways of teaching mindfulness, and people teach it, and they all have their place. They're all beneficial for the most part. But I wanted to really have a more comprehensive approach, which really, deliberately talked about how to connect to the, how to have a program or process that has to do with cultivating wisdom and speaking to morality, like Anderson Cooper was. So there's a thing called, because when I worked in the prisons, I've met guys from a particular part of Boston that were known as bank robbers, and they were mindful and they were concentrated, and they had sustained effort, but it wasn't right mindfulness, it wasn't right concentration, it wasn't right effort. So I think that we need. I wanted to share that there's this, there's this threefold practice. It's developing wisdom and acting properly or acting out of right action with non-harming, compassion, which a lot of people talk about these days, loving kindness, and the mental training. And, that they're all connected, that the right view can help us with, or understanding how things work can help us with our actions, word, thought, and deed. And that when we had a certain morality or integrity and that we weren't causing harm, it would actually enhance our ability to be still and to develop mindfulness and concentration.
I completely agree. And we've heard the criticism of the mindful sniper kind of scenario. And anyone I have spoken with who teaches in the corporate world, who teaches in the military or other environments that often get these kind of criticisms, absolutely none of them teach in a way that is different from what you've just described, George, that there's a larger context that is part of what we're teaching.
Well, yeah. So I wanted to make that more explicit, to actually have a template or have a voice out there where we could start to see it in a more holistic way, and that we actually spend time developing those three modes of training.
So you also, in addition to the work you've done in prison outreach programs, in addition to this book and your work in the sports world, you also teach kids, and you have for a long time. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I've been teaching kids on my own, or young folks, private clients. Sometimes, like I said, somebody said, "Oh, can you work with my kid or do this?" But when I was at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, we would get these requests, and I had a friend of mine who was a social worker that wanted me to come into her particular school because they had these kids that have been traumatized, either physically or sexually or combination of other ways, and so of being traumatized. And so I would go in and give these talks and introduce the practice to them, introduce mindfulness, and that sort of thing. And then recently I started working with Ivy Child. It's a program that's international that works for kids, teaching them meditation and mindfulness and yoga, as well as some of the other components of, how to curb violence and be more present. So yeah, it's pretty obvious to me that, it's like one of the metaphors that they use at the Center for Mindfulness, they used to use it when I was there, was this whole idea of upstream, downstream. And, you can be downstream and you can be pulling people out of the water, or you can go upstream and stop them from getting in. So the earlier we get folks exposed to this stuff, I think the better. As a matter of fact, I have a book that I'm going to be writing coming out sometime in the future. I think 2017, maybe in this, I think we were shooting for this fall. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that's going to still happen unless the deadlines change, where I'm doing a mindful athlete for teens. So I'm going to address some of these issues, and it won't trickle all the way down to like the elementary school, but at some point maybe I'll get to that through Ivy Child and training and some articles about how to do that work, or how we might approach it, or be interested, or how other people are doing it and approaching it. Maybe that's the way to look at it. So yeah, so there'll be a component. I would say that, right now I get a lot of requests since the book has been published, it's doing well, where there's a focus on working with kids, or young folks, little people, if you want to call them that. And obviously, what's being driven from my mindful athlete. But you could really just say mindful, and then you could put in whatever description you want, or whatever modality, or whatever domain, the mindful parent, or whatever. And so I will continue to talk about the book and components of the book, which I believe is very foundational. And so I think that should be around for a long time, helping people. And that's the feedback I'm getting. And then the other component is developing an academy. And
Yeah, tell us about that. That was something that we were discussing earlier.
yeah, well, I think once again, I get a lot of requests, and there's a lot of folks out there, and I can't be in all these places. So it makes sense to have some kind of virtual academy or virtual hub or media outlet or whatever. And I watch Oprah Super Soul Sunday and some of these other things going on, and with the apps, with places that are, people are going online to do things. And because people have smartphones, that gives them access to at least connect with them, and then actually have a process or a program that people can work through that helps them to, be more present for their lives, that helps them to be able to examine their lives, but not in a vacuum, but actually as part of a bigger group or community, however you want to say it. So I think having an online academy would be great, as well as having some kind of certificate program to teach people to teach or to develop a teaching style, or to be able to work with the populations I've worked with. Where I feel like one of my advantages is I've worked in many different domains. So there's a approach that one could have no matter what domain they're in, that will keep them keep the essence of what is being taught front and center.
So, George, is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, yes. So interestingly, obviously I want to have an impact on more people. And it's obvious, growing up in the city, I always had a place for like prisons and hospitals and institutions. Definitely want to support that, but also with the election, the way it's been, it turned out and everything, I think there's something to be said about reaching out to those rural areas where we may not feel like we're maybe as welcome, because they're not traditionally the ones that come to the Center for Mindfulness or Insight Meditation Society or Cambridge Insight Meditation Center or Spirit Rock or one of the numerous centers where this stuff is taught, even Omega or Kapal, all of these different places that we may have to go to them. And I think obviously the academy, the online web stuff, or actually just doing outreach and making programs available. And I think that's where the schools can come in, if you can ripple out to that, and the online academy, so that we reach everybody, because everybody needs to have discernment, be able to make choices that are consistent with them. Because you look around, you see that there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of divide and conquer, and there's a lot of feeling alienated and powerless, not to mention feeling disconnected or feeling alone. So those issues have to be addressed, and we need to talk about how we can live together instead of being in this adversarial environment where one side against the other, or one side trying to impose their will on the other side.
Well, for those who are interested in finding out more about George and his work, I'm linking to his site, mindfulathlete.org, on the episode page for this episode, as well as link to his book, Mindful Athlete, Secrets to Peak Performance. And I'll also embed a video of George being interviewed about that, as well as the 60 Minutes video, because I think that's interesting. So folks listening, please do check out the site. George, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thanks, Ted. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.